You know that feeling when you are watching a movie, and suddenly the camera pulls back and you realize you are not in the story anymore. You are observing it from outside. That is the kind of loneliness we are talking about. It does not break you. It does not make you cry. Fear simply places you in a different dimension, separated from what everyone else is experiencing by something invisible and absolutely impenetrable. You can be surrounded by people laughing, talking, making plans, and you are physically there, your body responding appropriately, but your consciousness is somewhere else entirely. It is as if you are behind a pane of glass that no one else can see, pressing your hand against it, watching the world move at a speed and with a purpose that no longer makes sense to you. The worst part is not the separation itself. The worst part is the uncertainty. Did you step outside, or did everyone else step outside and leave you standing alone in a room that is no longer a room? This distance is not always about being rejected or pushed away. Sometimes it is the opposite. Sometimes people still seek you out. Sometimes your phone still lights up with notifications. But you feel as though you are communicating through a translator, as though you are watching your own life unfold from somewhere outside it, making the right sounds and expressions, but never quite touching anything real. You might wonder if this means you are becoming cold. You might fear that you are becoming the kind of person who does not care anymore, who has somehow broken something inside themselves that cannot be repaired. The accusation whispers at you constantly. You are becoming indifferent. You are becoming hard. You are becoming empty. And perhaps the worst part of all is that you cannot entirely disagree with this assessment. When you examine yourself honestly, you find it is increasingly difficult to muster enthusiasm for things that once animated you. Other people's dramas, which once felt urgent and compelling, now register as background noise. Small talk feels like a performance you have already given 1,000 times. Even things you are supposed to want, success, recognition, romantic connection, now appear through a thin veil of irrelevance. You find yourself thinking, I should care about this. And that very thought, that awareness that you are not naturally caring, only makes you feel more broken. It feels like you are watching yourself gradually disappear, and you are powerless to stop it. There exists a possibility, however, that what you are experiencing is not a breakdown but a breakthrough. There exists a possibility that what feels like emptiness is actually the emptying of something false. There exists a possibility that the distance you feel from other people is not a defect in you but a shift in perception. A moment when the machinery behind the scenes becomes briefly visible, when the constant hum of conditioning and expectation begins to quiet down, and you start to see things as they actually are, rather than as you have been taught they should be. This shift is not comfortable. It is not marketed as something valuable or worth pursuing. In fact, the entire structure of modern life is designed to prevent it, to keep the machinery humming, to keep people asleep in the most literal sense. And when it begins to happen, it can feel like a kind of violence against yourself, because you are losing access to the things that previously made life feel manageable, even enjoyable. The fog that settles around you is not depression in the clinical sense, though it can look like that from the outside. It is something closer to a temporary interruption in the agreement you have been making with reality. Consider for a moment the machinery of ordinary social life. A human being is born with certain needs and certain capacities for joy and connection. But very quickly, almost from the moment of birth, a large apparatus begins to shape these needs into particular forms. Family, school, media, peers, all of these work in concert, most of them unconsciously, to channel your longing for connection into very specific directions. You learn to want what others want. You learn to value what others value. You learn to present yourself in ways that generate approval. You learn that your worth is measured by external markers, how many friends you have, whether people laugh at your jokes, whether you fit into a particular image or role. And for a very long time, this works. You engage with the game. You follow the rules. You accumulate the markers of success and belonging, and this gives you a sense of direction, a sense of meaning. But then something shifts, and the shift is subtle at first. You might be reading something, or having a conversation, or sitting alone, when suddenly the entire arrangement becomes visible to you in a way it was not before. You see in a moment of clarity that you have been performing according to rules you never consciously agreed to. You see that the approval you have been chasing is hollow, because it is approval for a version of you that you constructed, not the thing underneath. You see that most of the relationships you maintain are structured around mutual performance, around the exchange of social favors, around the agreement to pretend that certain things matter when they do not. And you cannot unsee this. Once you have seen the mechanism, you cannot go back to the innocence of not knowing it is there. This is where the real loneliness begins. Not because you have fewer friends, though you might, but because you have lost the ability to fully participate in the agreement that makes friendship, as it is normally understood, possible. You sit across from someone you have known for years, and you realize that you have never had a genuine conversation with them. You realize that both of you have been taking turns performing versions of yourselves designed to elicit specific responses, and that this has been called intimacy, and that it is not. You realize that the laughter you both share is laughter at things that do not matter, and you cannot bring yourself to participate in the pretense that they do. You start to withdraw not out of malice or disdain, but because something in you has become unable to sustain the fiction. The fear that accompanies this shift is profound, because you know, on some level, that what keeps society functioning is the maintenance of these fictions. People need to believe that certain things matter. They need the structures of meaning and connection and purpose that allow them to move through the world without constantly confronting the fundamental strangeness of existence. And if you begin to see through these structures, if you begin to opt out of the agreement, you become a kind of threat, not a threat in the sense of danger, but a threat to the collective agreement that everyone is trying to maintain. Other people sense this. They sense that you are no longer fully playing along, and this creates an unspoken friction. They may withdraw from you. They may judge you as arrogant or cold. They may feel that your refusal to pretend is a kind of criticism of their pretending, which in a way it is. So you find yourself with fewer friends, not always because you have rejected them, but because the mutual performance has become impossible, and genuine friendship is too rare to stumble upon accidentally. You might at this point begin to wonder if you have made a terrible mistake. You might wonder if your lucidity is actually just a form of illness, a kind of arrogance disguised as wisdom, a defense mechanism against connection. You might look at other people and see how they manage to stay engaged, and you might feel a deep shame that you can no longer manage what seems to come naturally to them. You might think, there is something wrong with me. I am broken. I have broken something that cannot be repaired. But let us examine this more carefully. What actually has happened is that you have begun to see a truth that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. And the truth is this, that much of human social life is structured around the avoidance of genuine encounter. We keep each other at a distance. We perform for each other. We use each other to confirm our identities and our sense of meaning. We tell ourselves that this is love, that this is friendship, that this is connection, when what it actually is a sophisticated system of mutual reassurance and distraction. And we do this not out of malice, but out of necessity, because genuine encounter is terrifying. Genuine encounter strips away the performance. Genuine encounter requires that you risk being seen as you actually are, and that you see others as they actually are, which is to say as confused, frightened, meaning-seeking creatures not so different from yourself. Most people are not equipped for this kind of encounter. They have been trained since childhood to avoid it. They have learned that their value lies in their performance, and so they have come to believe that they are their performance. The thought of stepping outside it is not merely uncomfortable, it is existentially threatening. So they do not do it. They find people to perform with, people who agree to maintain the same fiction, and they call this friendship. And in a way, this is not entirely wrong. There is real comfort in mutual performance. There is real warmth in being with people who have agreed to see you as you have presented yourself. But it is a comfort built on a foundation that cannot ultimately support genuine love. What you are beginning to experience then is not a breakdown, but an interruption. You are falling out of step with a dance that most people are still performing, and this creates a silence around you. The silence is not a sign of failure. It is a sign that you have temporarily lost access to the mechanisms that usually bind people together, and you have not yet found anything real to replace them with. You are in a liminal space. You are in a waiting room between two ways of being alive, and this waiting room is cold, and it is lonely, and it feels like death, because in a way it is. Something is dying. The version of you that was satisfied with performance is dying. The version of you that believed that accumulating friends and approval would eventually make you feel whole is dying. The version of you that could participate in ordinary small talk without feeling the gap between what is being said and what is real is dying. But here is what is important to understand. This death is not the end of the story. It is the necessary interval between one form of life and another. It is the dissolution of something false so that something real can begin to form. And the discomfort you feel, the loneliness, the sense of being fundamentally broken, these are not signs that something has gone wrong. These are signs that you are awake in a way that most people are not, and that you are now responsible for what you know. Think of it like this. Imagine you have been living in a theater your entire life. You were born backstage in the darkness, and very quickly the other inhabitants taught you how to walk onto the stage, how to speak your lines, how to interact with the other performers according to a script that everyone has agreed to follow. The stage lights are bright, the audience is responsive, the other performers are consistent. You can predict how they will react to what you say. You know exactly what lines will get laughter. You know exactly what movements will generate applause, and for a very long time this is enough. You become good at your role, you become comfortable. The lights and the sounds and the other performers become the entire world to you. You stop thinking about the fact that you are performing. It just becomes life. But then at some moment that you cannot predict or control, your awareness shifts. Perhaps you notice a gap in the curtain. Perhaps you see a shadow moving backstage. Perhaps you simply become conscious in a way you were not before, that you are speaking lines that were written by someone else, and suddenly the stage lights become artificial. The audience becomes a distraction. The other performers become people who are also performing, and you realize that you have never actually met any of them. They have only ever met the character you are playing, and once this awareness enters your mind, it becomes impossible to unsee. At this point you have several options. The first option is to try to forget what you have seen. You can look away from the gap in the curtain. You can pretend that the stage is the entire world, and you can throw yourself back into the performance with renewed intensity. Many people do this. They become even more invested in their role, even more committed to the performance, because the alternative is too frightening. But the awareness lingers. You might succeed in suppressing it for a while, but it never completely goes away. The second option is to stop performing. You can step back from your lines. You can refuse to play along with the script. You can turn to the other performers and say, "This is not real. We are performing for people who are not actually here. We are enacting a story that no longer makes sense." And what happens when you do this? The other performers become confused. They become angry. They become afraid. Because your refusal to perform threatens the entire edifice that they have built their sense of safety around. The stage lights seem to flicker. The audience seems to disappear. You are left standing alone, and it is very cold, and it is very dark, and you have no idea what comes next. And here is the crucial point. This is where most people who begin to wake up find themselves. They stop performing or they cannot perform anymore, but they have not yet found another way to be alive. They are no longer at home in the theater, but they are not yet at home anywhere else. They are in the cold darkness backstage, and there is no script to follow, and they do not know who they are when they are not performing. This is the space where genuine friendship cannot yet exist, because friendship, real friendship, requires a certain clarity and a certain groundedness that you cannot yet access. Real friendship requires that you know who you are underneath the performance. And you do not know that yet. You are still figuring it out. You are still becoming it. This is why you find yourself with few friends or no friends. Not because you have become broken, but because you have become temporarily homeless. You have lost the home that the theater provided. You have stopped inhabiting the rooms that other people were sharing with you. But you have not yet built a new home or found a new room or discovered what it means to be alive outside of performance. So there is a gap. There is a space where friendship used to be, or could have been, and it is empty now. And you mistake this emptiness for a defect in yourself. You mistake this homelessness for evidence that you are fundamentally unlovable, fundamentally broken. But what if the opposite is true? What if the emptiness is necessary? What if the loneliness is the price you are paying for beginning to see clearly? What if the dissolution of your old relationships is what must happen in order for new, real relationships to eventually become possible? What if the silence is not a sentence of isolation, but an interval of profound silence in which something new is being prepared? There is a particular kind of person who finds themselves in this space, and Richard Feynman, the physicist, understood something about this kind of person that is worth examining. Feynman was a man who had learned early in his life to see through things. He had learned to look at a problem and see its essential structure, stripped of decoration and pretense. He had learned to recognize in nearly every context the moment when things shifted from genuine inquiry to performance, from true understanding to the recitation of received knowledge. And this capacity, this ability to see through, had a peculiar effect on his life. He had few close friends. He seemed to keep most people at a distance. He was often described as difficult, arrogant, somewhat cold. But what people missed most of the time was that Feynman's distance was not personal rejection. It was not coldness in the sense of cruelty or indifference. It was the distance of someone who had seen that most of what passes for connection in ordinary life is false, and who could not pretend otherwise. Feynman had certain traits that are rare. The first was the capacity to distinguish, with an almost brutal clarity, between what he actually understood and what he merely thought he understood. He could sit in a room full of people who believed they understood something, and he could ask a simple question, and suddenly it would become apparent that nobody actually understood it at all. They were reciting a story that had been given to them. They were performing comprehension, but they were not actually thinking. And once Feynman had seen this, once he had asked the question and revealed the gap, he could no longer pretend to be satisfied with the previous level of conversation. He had to keep asking. He had to keep pressing deeper. And this made him very difficult to be around for people who wanted to maintain the fiction that they understood things. The second trait was an almost pathological honesty about his own confusion and uncertainty. Feynman seemed to lack the normal human capacity to pretend confidence when he did not feel it. He would admit openly when something did not make sense to him. He would say in a room full of intelligent people, "I do not understand this." And somehow this statement, which should have been humiliating, became the most honest and therefore the most intelligent thing anyone had said. It was radical. Most people, most of the time, are performing confidence even when they are deeply confused. They are performing understanding even when they are lost. But Feynman seemed incapable of this performance, and this incapacity, this refusal to pretend, made him lonely. The third trait was a kind of genuine curiosity that could not be satisfied by answers that came from authority or tradition or convenience. If something was interesting to Feynman, he would want to understand it for himself directly, without relying on what other people had said about it. This meant that he was often out of step with the collective agreements of his peers. He was often believing things that had been debunked, or disbelieving things that were accepted as true, because he was still in the process of understanding them for himself, and this made him seem erratic, unreliable, perhaps even a little untrustworthy. He was not a team player in the sense of agreeing to move forward with the official story. He was always pausing to ask questions. People with these traits, the capacity to see through, the compulsion to be honest about confusion, the refusal to accept answers that come from authority alone, these people tend to find themselves isolated. They tend to have few friends, and they tend to interpret this isolation as a sign that something is wrong with them. They think, perhaps I am too critical, perhaps I am too distant, perhaps I have closed myself off from genuine connection, perhaps I am arrogant, perhaps I am fundamentally incapable of friendship. And there is a grain of truth in all of this, which makes it so insidious. It is possible to use intellectual honesty as a disguise for superiority. It is possible to use the habit of questioning as a tool to make other people feel small. It is possible to use your clarity about the false nature of most human connection as an excuse to withdraw, to become hard, to use intelligence as a weapon rather than as a tool for understanding. And this is the real danger, not the isolation itself, but what you do with the isolation, not the loneliness itself, but the way you choose to interpret it and armor yourself against it. This is where ego can hide. This is where spiritual pride can flourish. Because once you have seen through some of the fictions that other people are still believing in, it is very easy to believe that you are more awake than they are. It is very easy to believe that you are more conscious, more honest, more willing to face truth. And this belief can make you hard. It can make you cold in a way that is not lucidity but cruelty. It can make you interpret every moment of genuine human need, every moment of vulnerability, every moment of someone reaching out to you, as evidence that they are asleep and you are awake. And then the loneliness is no longer an interval of necessary solitude. It is a prison of your own construction, built brick by brick out of a superiority that you have confused with clarity. So here is what is crucial to understand. The fact that you have few friends, the fact that you find yourself isolated, The fact that you can no longer participate in the ordinary fictions of human connection, none of this makes you better. None of this makes you more enlightened or more evolved or more conscious. It does not mean that you have arrived at some higher plane of understanding. It means that you are awake to certain things, yes, but you are also blind to other things. You have seen through the theater, but you have not yet built a home. You have rejected false connection, but you have not yet learned how to create real connection. You have developed the capacity to see, but not yet the wisdom to know how to live with what you see. And the temptation at this point is to use your clarity as a weapon, to use it to justify hardness, to use it to keep people away, to transform your lucidity into a kind of superior detachment that prevents you from being touched or changed or surprised by another human being. This is perhaps the most common mistake that people make when they begin to wake up. They think that wakefulness means becoming harder, more isolated, more invulnerable. They think that seeing through the fictions of ordinary life means rejecting the possibility of genuine warmth and connection. And in doing this, they miss something essential, that the goal is not detachment, but discernment. Not isolation, but clarity about what is real and what is false, so that you can move toward the real things with fewer illusions. Real friendship, when it happens, is rare. It happens between people who have both seen through some of the fictions, who have both lost the ability to pretend entirely, but who have not yet decided that this makes them superior to others. It happens between people who understand that their lucidity is incomplete, their understanding is partial, their vision is limited. It happens between people who have had the courage to step outside the theater and who are now standing together in the cold dark, not with pride, but with a kind of humble confusion about what comes next. Real friendship is not the performance of friendship. It is not the exchange of mutual reassurance or the maintenance of mutual fictions. It is the simple presence of another human being who is trying, like you, to figure out what is real. It is the quiet knowledge that you do not have to pretend, because the other person is not pretending either. It is the possibility, small but real, of genuine encounter. And here is something that is very difficult to say and very important to hear. The emptiness you feel, the loneliness, the silence that surrounds you, these are not problems to be solved. They are not failures to be corrected. They are the natural condition of someone who is waking up. They are what it feels like to be in the space between two ways of being alive. And this space is cold and it is dark and it seems like it will last forever. But it does not last forever. What lasts is the clarity you have gained. What remains is the capacity to see. What stays with you is the incapacity to fully pretend anymore. And slowly, over time, this becomes normal. The silence becomes familiar. The distance from others becomes less painful, because you stop interpreting it as rejection and start understanding it as alignment. You find that you can be present with other people without needing them to perform for you. You find that you can let them rest in their own fictions without anger or judgment. You find that there is a kind of peace in not requiring the world to be different than it is. And sometimes, not often, but sometimes, you find someone else who is also in this space. Someone else who has lost the ability to fully perform. Someone else who is standing in the cold dark, confused about what comes next. And when this happens, there is a kind of recognition, not recognition of who they are, because you still do not fully know, but recognition of the fact that they are also trying to find their way. They are also real in their confusion. They are also present in their uncertainty. And this quiet knowledge that you are not alone in your aloneness is a beginning. What nobody tells you is that peace does not feel like happiness. Clarity does not feel like joy. Wakefulness does not arrive in waves of bliss. These are the experiences sold by the marketplace, and they are lies. Real peace feels like rest. Real clarity feels like seeing something you have always known but never quite noticed. Real wakefulness feels like standing in a quiet place and looking around and recognizing where you are, for perhaps the first time. It is not exciting. It is not dramatic. It is not impressive. But it is real. And once you have touched something real, the performances become impossible to sustain entirely. They become a kind of language you speak when you're out in public, but they are not who you are. They are what you do, not what you are. The people with few or no friends who have these rare traits of seeing through, of refusing to pretend, of pressing deeper into truth, these people are not broken. They are not damaged goods. They are not failed at the game of human connection. They have simply stepped outside the game. And the cost of stepping outside is loneliness. The cost of seeing clearly is distance from those who do not see. The cost of being honest about confusion is the inability to maintain the performance of certainty. These are real costs. There is no way to avoid them. There is no philosophical reframing that makes them disappear. You will lose things. You will be misunderstood. You will be alone sometimes, maybe often. But what you gain is this. You gain the possibility of living in a way